Hey guys, this is Mr. O'Brien here, and in this lesson we are looking at the science of life. So with the science of life, our focus question for this lesson is what are the characteristics of living things? So if you take a look here at our praying mantis, okay, our praying mantis obviously is a living thing. What makes that a living thing? What makes this alive? What set of features that are shared by all living things allow it to exist? So to kind of learn about biology, we kind of got to look at how biology is done. So Jane Goodall is a great example. She studied chimpanzees, and she got so close with them that they were pretty much part of the troop. Now, before Jane Goodall arrived in the Stream National Park in Tanzania, Africa in 1960 to study chimpanzees, her curiosity, determinations, and patience over a long period of time resulted in chimpanzees troops accepting her and her presence so that she was able to observe their behavior. So it took her a long time to gain their trust. And once she gained her trust, she was able to see all of these different things that allowed chimpanzees to exist. So again, it took a lot of time. Now, when people study living things or pose questions about how living things interact with the environment, they are learning about biology. Now, biology is the study of life. So when you're looking at a living organism and you're seeing how is that living organism interacting? How is it surviving? What is it doing? That is what we're referring to as biology. Now, biology comes from the Greek word bio, meaning, or another meaning from logos, meaning study. All right? Now, what I want you to do now is predict the types of questions you would ask if you observed chimpanzee behavior. Now, if you think about this, and you think about if you're studying it, a lot of things you're going to be asking is, what are the chimpanzees doing? You know, what is it going on right there? What are they doing? What is occurring in this whole thing? And after you establish what they are doing, then you can ask why. Why are these behaviors occurring? What is allowing them to do these specific things? So the what leads to the why of how life or how these things exist. Now, in biology, we will do the following things when we are studying. First of all, we're going to be studying the origins and history of living and once living things. All right? So again, the key here is studying. We need to be able to understand what is occurring. Okay? After that, we're going to be looking at the structure of living things. All right? So the structure of something often leads to the function of something. So structure and function kind of go hand in hand. Why are our fingers shaped the way they are? They're shaped the way they are to do certain tasks. The structure leads to the function. How are living things interacting with one another? How living things function? What are they doing that allows them to survive? So these four things, studying the origins, the structure, how they interact, as well as their function, they allow us to think about the world in a different way. So have you ever hiked in a forest and wondered why different trees have leaves with different shapes, or why some animals are nocturnal? So one nocturnal animal that we're looking at here is our raccoon. Now, why do raccoons only come out at night? And the reason is it gives them a competitive advantage, a better chance because they're a scavenger of stealing food of organisms that maybe are sleeping. So again, or if we take a look at some different plants, right? We have broadleaf plants that kind of sometimes look like this. Why are they shaped that way? Or why do we have other things like pine needles? So what's the difference between the two? And it has to do with the rate of photosynthesis. Okay, the broadleaf trees are better in a sunny environment, whereas the small, tiny, pointed ones and the needles, those are better in cold climates. So when you ask these questions, what you are doing is you're asking these questions and you are observing. You're asking questions about life, and we're trying to figure out what is occurring in the natural world. So biologists are people that seek and make discoveries, and they seek explanations by performing laboratory and field investigation. So again, by asking questions like, why is this fish buried in the sand? Maybe when we ask that question, how does this hide from its food? It's using camouflage by hiding in the sand in order to attack their food source. So again, we ask the what is occurring to lead to why is it occurring. Now, what are some things that biologists do? First of all, they study the diversity of life. There is so much different life that exists on planet Earth, and what we are doing is studying that diversity. All the organisms that have been around or are still around today. All right, so we research diseases, and by researching diseases, we are able to maybe cure diseases. Again, something that's really important going down the line. Just think about a few years ago, COVID was a huge problem, right? So we researched this disease, and we figured out what are some steps that we can take in order to prevent it. We developed new techniques. These new techniques may allow us to grow food or live a better lifestyle. Again, this is all done through science. So, for example, this individual has a prosthetic arm, and that prosthetic arm is computerized that she's able to grab the daisy located right here. Again, a new technique in order to better somebody's life, improve agriculture, even preserve the environment for the long run. Again, all of these things are some things that biologists do. Now, some jobs that you may not even think of sometimes that are in biology is something like a technical writer. Now, a technical writer are for individuals who like to explain how things work. Now, that's exactly what technical writers do. Every day there are new and exciting advances in science and technology, and technical writers communicate information about these advances online or in written documents. In this career, you need to be able to research, understand, and clearly explain scientific and technological concepts. So maybe you want to be a writer, maybe you enjoy the English field. That doesn't mean you can't go into science. Being a technical writer would be a great step if you want to be in the science community but aren't necessarily want to do all the classes. So that leads us to the characteristics of life. So when you're trying to define what makes something alive, okay, what makes something living or alive, it's really something that sometimes seems like it's very hard to define. So when we're talking about something that is alive, okay, there are a set of characteristics that define this. So fire is something that is able to move. It increases in size, has energy, and seems to reproduce because it can produce more fire. But how does fire differ from a bear and salmon? You have any ideas? So obviously there are some differences, and we're going to talk about these in general. Fire, for example, is not made of cells. So our first characteristic of life is made of one or more cells. Okay? Now when we're talking about cells are the basic unit of structure and function in all living things. So if you take a look over here are some bacteria cells, and these bacteria cells, or streptococcus right here, they are actually what causes strep throat. Okay? So cells can be one of two things. They can either be unicellular, it just has one cell, for example, bacteria, or they could be multicellular. They have many cells. Humans, plants are examples of these. So cells and how those cells are arranged are a key component of the characteristics of life. Now, this kind of leads to the next thing of structure and function. Now, the structure of each heart cell, which is this long striated version that we have right here, right? The long striations we see. That structure leads to the function of continually pumping blood throughout the body. Now, if we take a look at these two things, these are roots. And if you ever do a cross-section of a roots, notice how there's all these tubes that are located in it. All right? These tubes, as well as stems, allow us to carry the nutritions and water from the soil. So the structure of the cells and tree roots enables them to help anchor into the ground, like this one over here, or to take up water from the ground and dissolve minerals in order to provide nutrition to the plant. So our next characteristic of life that we have is they display organization. Now, when we're talking about organization or displaying organization, this just simply means they are arranged in an orderly way. So in less than a month, these robin chicks hatch from their egg, grow and develop from a helpless chick to a bird that is able to fly out of the nest. Okay, that is organization of how that organism is put together that allows it to survive. So a paramecium is made up of one cell, yet the cell is a collection of organized structures that carry on life. If you look inside of this, if you look inside of this paramecium right here, you can see all of these different structures, and every single one of these structures called organelles performs a specific task that allows the paramecium to survive. So again, when we're looking at this, it's one of those things where, again, organisms show this very complex way of living. Now, multicellular organisms, they have a hierarchical structure and organization in which any one system is made of numerous parts and is itself a component of the next level. So when we're looking at our multicellular organism, in this case, which is a robin is made of specialized cells that are organized into tissues. So their lowest level of organization are cells, and as we work our way up to tissues, they become more and more complex. Tissues are then organized into organs, which are organized into an organ system that carry on functions. So heart tissue makes up the heart, which makes up the circulatory system. So you can see how we're getting more and more complex. That organ system works together to support an organism. In this case, it would be the robin. So cells, tissues, organ system, organism. So systems of specialized cells within organisms help them to perform the essential functions of life. All right. Now the next one we have here is growth and development. Now, as organisms grow and develop, they become more complex and they add more and more cells. So most organisms begin as one cell. So growth is the result or results in the addition of mass to an organism. And in many organisms, the formation of new cells and new structures continue to grow. Okay? So even you started out as one cell. And even as you are speaking, you're continually making more and more cells to replace the cells you already have. You go from one cell to billions of cells in a relatively quick amount of time. Development is the process of natural changes that take the place during life of an organism. So an example of this would be like robin chicks cannot fly for the first few weeks of their lives. They develop structures that give them these specific abilities to do so. They develop as time progresses. So these two things kind of go hand in hand. So growth and development. So the next one we have is reproduces. Now, without reproduction, we don't have more of a species. So most things are the result of reproduction and the production of offspring. So reproduction is not an essential characteristic for individual organisms. Like, for example, if an individual organism does not reproduce, it's not going to mean that they're not going to survive. It just means that the species is not going to continue to exist if all organisms don't reproduce. Okay? So to characterize a species, again, this is one of those things that is kind of important when we're looking at biology, when we're classifying species. A species is a group of organisms that can breed with one another and produce fertile offspring. So that is what makes something part of the same species, being able to breed and reproduce. So the next one we have would be response to a stimuli. Now, anything that is part of either the external or internal environments and causes some sort of reaction by the organism is called a stimuli or a stimulus. The reaction to the stimulus is a response. So, for example, if I have my Venus flytrap, they have these little tiny hairs on the inside of their mouths. And when the fly creates a stimulus on the inside on these hairs, it elicits a response of it closing around that fly in order to consume it. Now, being able to respond to the environment is very critical for organism safety and survival. If an organism is unable to respond to danger or to reach a potential enemy, it might not live long enough to reproduce. So being able to respond to stimuli, to read the stimuli is really important in the survivability of organisms. So the next one we have would be requires energy. Now, when we are looking at energy, right? Energy can come in a few different ways. So living things, they need a source of energy in order to survive. Living things get their energy from food. Now, how they get that food varies. So plants, obviously the green stuff that grows out of the ground, they use light energy from the sun to make their own fuel and fuel activities. So plants use photosynthesis, and they make their own food. They make their own food through the sun's rays that are striking them in order to make these complex things. Now, animals and fungi, they get their food by consuming other organisms, which is why we call them heterotrophs. Okay? Heterotrophs just simply means they need to eat something different and they can't make their own food. Okay? Now, the next one we have would be homeostasis. So being able to maintain internal environments or internal conditions is really important for organisms. So regulation of an organism's internal conditions to maintain life is homeostasis. So homeostasis occurs in all living things and is maintained and regulated at all levels of organization. So if anything happens within or to an organism that affects its normal state, processes restore the normal state begin. So in other words, when something happens to the internal conditions, the body performs some sort of thing to bring that back down to homeostasis. So if homeostasis is not restored, death might occur. And this is really important. And one of the cool animals that you always see this in is the jackrabbit, right? So if you notice, you can see how there are all these blood vessels inside of the jackrabbit's ears. Well, that's because rabbits can't sweat. So these ears right here are their air conditioning unit. As the wind comes by, and blows over these ears, right, what that does is it dissipates the heat, and that's actually what cools it down by the heat exchange of the ears. Now, the next one we have are adaptations. Now, adaptations, these are things that occur over a long extended period of time. An adaptation is an inherited characteristic that results from changes to a species over time. So, adaptations enable species to survive, which makes them better able to pass on their genes. The better they're able to survive, the better chance they have of reproducing and making more of those individuals. So let's take a look at a few of these adaptations that we have. So adaptations in polar regions where it's cold. Notice how all the animals are white colored to blend in with snow. Whereas in the rainforest, we see bright colorations. And again, that's because of the plants and things like that. You can see more of a characteristic in that sort of thing. So depending on a region, would be these things right here. These are drip tips. So these drip tips allow the water to flow off the leaves. Now, why would this be a benefit in a very wet climate? So harmful molds and mildews do not grow on these dry leaves because the water is able to dry off them. So this means that the plants with dry leaves is healthier and has a better chance to survive. So let's revisit our focus question here. What are some important things that we talked about. What are the characteristics of life? So again, when we are talking about the characteristics of life, we are talking about the characteristics that we have that allow organisms to survive. So when we look at these characteristics of life, things like made of one or more cells, display of organization, growth and development, reproduction, response to stimuli, requiring energy, maintaining homeostasis, and adaptations evolve over time. These characteristics of life, if even one of these characteristics are missed, then that organism is not considered living. And with that, these characteristics allow organisms to define what are known as species. That allows us to define organisms throughout history. All right? So, in summary here, biologists study the structure and function of living things, their history, their interactions with the environment, and many other aspects of life. So all organisms share certain characteristics that scientists use these characteristics to determine whether something is living or non-living. So hopefully this helps you out. Again, this is Mr. O'Brien, and this is Module 1, Lesson 1.